Have you ever wondered how photosynthesis works? No? Well, we're about to show you.
This right here is called a leaf.
But this is what that leaf really looks like. These are cells, plant cells, and each one contains at least one chloroplast. Each cell has a bunch of other organelles too, but for photosynthesis, the chloroplast is by far the most important. Chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis, which looks something like this. 6CO2 plus 6H2O turns into C6H12O6 plus 6O2.
Sunlight plays a crucial role in photosynthesis as it provides chloroplasts with energy during light-dependent reactions. Energy from the sun travels to the earth as light. This sunlight, which is seen by the humans as white light, is actually a mixture of different wavelengths, which is when the visible light spectrum comes into play. These different wavelengths are seen by our eyes as the colors violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. Purple light wavelengths have short wavelengths compared to red light. Wavelengths are simply the distance between corresponding points on consecutive waves. Wavelength decreases as you progress from the purple side to the red side of the visible light spectrum. Shorter wavelengths are correlated with higher energy, whereas longer wavelengths are correlated to having a lower energy. But how does this even affect plants? Plants contain a variety of pigments. 3 are chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoid. Chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are responsible for giving leaves their green hue. Having multiple pigments is very important to plants, as it allows plants to absorb different wavelengths of light, thus expanding the range of light energy that plants can utilize. This graph shows the absorption of different light wavelengths in the varying pigments we discussed: chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoid. Chlorophyll B absorbs the blue and violet wavelengths of light very well, and chlorophyll B also absorbs the yellow-orange wavelengths of light fairly well. Chlorophyll A absorbs the red region of wavelengths very well. But both chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B do not absorb green light well. In fact, they actually reflect green light, which is why leaves have a green hue. Carotenoid absorbs the green wavelengths of light, but reflects the yellow region of wavelengths of light.
This is something called the Calvin cycle, and it is basically where all of the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis occur. Up here, carbon dioxide is going to come into the cycle and join with pre-existing ReOBP, which is getting reused. Those are going to join together by something called rubisco, which is an enzyme, and they're going to form a 6th carbon molecule. That 6th carbon molecule is then going to move on to the next step in the cycle, where ATP and NADPH will come in, and ADP and NADP plus will come out. The ADP loses a phosphate, and that goes to the light-dependent reaction. The process of the Calvin cycle gaining energy shows us exactly why sugar has energy, or in other words, why consuming sugar gives us energy. As all of this is happening, the ReOBP is traveling all around the cycle and coming back to be reused, which is how this cycle can continue on forever. As everything in the cycle gets energized, sugar or glucose is eventually going to break off, which is how the Calvin cycle creates sugars.
So today, I'm going to talk about a light-dependent reaction, which is one of the 2 main reactions that occurs in photosynthesis. So the light-dependent reaction occurs in the thylakoids, or chloroplasts, the tiny green discs, specifically the thylakoid membrane, which is pictured here. Light-dependent reaction uses energy from sunlight and electrons from water to produce oxygen and convert ADP and NADP plus into the energy carriers ATP and NADPH. Our first step is to the separation of H2O, water, into these 3 primary components. Hydrogen plus ions, which are simply protons, for hydrogen plus ions. A pair of oxygens, which actually exits the cell and is the oxygen we breathe, and 4 electrons. These 4 electrons play a crucial role in this process as they head straight to photosystem 2. But what even is photosystem 2, you may ask? Well, photosystems are these clusters of chlorophyll and proteins that absorb sunlight and energize these electrons. So our 4 electrons are getting energized, but what are they getting energized by? It's a great question, and that is light from the sun. So keep in mind, chlorophyll is a pigment, so it absorbs wavelengths of light, and it passes on this energy to these electrons. These electrons then pass through an electron transport chain through these tiny electron carrier proteins. And as they do so, they lose energy. And some of that energy is used to pump H plus ions that are in the stroma into our thylakoid space. So now there will be an abundance of these H plus ions, protons, in our thylakoid space, which is also known as the lumen. But now that these electrons have lost energy, they need to be re-energized. That's where photosystem 1 comes in. Now I know it may be confusing as to why 2 comes first and then 1 comes, but that's simply because photosystem 1 was found first by scientists. So in photosystem 1, these 4 electrons that have traveled through these electron carrier proteins get re-energized, once again by light from the sun. So these electrons then go through a second very short electron transport chain till they are picked up by NADP+. So 2 NADP+. Then 2 hydrogens are also picked up, 2H+. And as I said before, our 4 electrons. Now that these 4 electrons have been picked up, you may be wondering what happens. Well, this combined together creates NADPH, which is a very important energy source in our reaction, specifically the light-independent reaction. So this creates NADPH. NADPH. But now you may be wondering what happens with all these H plus ions that have accumulated in our thylakoid membrane. Well, don't forget, we didn't forget about them. And that is where ATP synthase comes in. The role of ATP synthase is to allow for these H plus ions to pass through it, as they can't simply diffuse across our membrane. These H plus ions go through ATP synthase, and think of ATP synthase as a rotor. A rotor, and as these H plus ions pass through it, it spins a rotor, kind of like a wind turbine or like a wooden wheel that may sit inside of a river to generate energy. And this energy is used to combine a phosphate group to ADP, which comes from our light independent reaction, and adds a phosphate group to it, creating ATP. So overall, this reaction is important as it creates NADPH and ATP, which then head off to our light independent reaction and help provide energy.
So let's learn more about photosynthesis, specifically evolutionary photosynthesis. This includes C4 and CAM plants, which both have evolved specialized photosynthetic pathways that help them thrive in hot and dry and high light intensity environments, and they can thrive in these environments by storing carbon dioxide for later use, which helps them minimize water loss and maximize their photosynthesis. So the stomata is basically small openings on a leaf that allow molecules to come in and out throughout it. So what are the specifics of CAM plants? So what they do is that CAM plants, they bring in air at night through their stomata, and they trap carbon dioxide in leaves. The carbon dioxide is stored as malic acid, and it later is used by the Calvin cycle. Moving on to C4 plants, they temporarily store carbon dioxide in the form of a 4-carbon molecule, and that's called oxaloacetate. This molecule then goes into the Calvin cycle. So this process is actually an adaptation that specifically minimizes the amount of energy and nutrient loss, but it requires extra ATP to continue. Both C4 and CAM plants have evolved to minimize water loss in hot and dry conditions. C4 plants achieve this through their carbon fixation, while CAM plants do so by opening their stomata only at night.